Hey guys, welcome to another theory and explanation video. This one is all about the infection, including what are some of the conditions that are necessary in order for someone to be susceptible, whether or not people can recover from this so-called illness, as well as just how it works in general. I'll also be talking about just a few cases in which I think it's possible that a character could have been infected, even though we were never explicitly told this is what happened to them. Before diving in though, I do want to give a shout out and thank you to Chuck Boyd. For over a year, Chuck was donating to this channel at the $1 level, and I recently started to feel that it wasn't really fair that I had never offered him the option of receiving a candidate number and being included in the cave of candidates. This is an option I offer at the $4 tier, and it only requires one donation in order to receive that. And so it didn't really seem fair that Chuck had donated much more than $4 and not received that option. So I did reach out to him, and he decided to choose the candidate number 32. Since reaching out to Chuck, he has graciously raised his donation to the $4 level, and he has now been added to the cave. So once again, Chuck, thank you very much for that, as well as all of your previous support. And as always, thank you to everyone else that continues to donate to this channel. To everyone else, if you would like to support this channel by becoming a Patreon donor, you can do so for as little as $1. And if you too would like to be added to the cave, one donation of $4 or 4 donations of $1 will earn you a place on the wall. Now, I did want to take this opportunity to give an update on my cave of candidates. As you guys may have noticed in my last video, I've started writing the names and numbers on the actual chalkboard wall. I wasn't really a fan of just kind of taping up the printouts of the names and numbers, and I've decided to stop filming in front of that chalkboard wall, partly so that I could just start putting the candidate names up there. Now, for anyone that donates and ends up on the wall, as I've said before, your candidate number will always be yours and only yours. And even if you only donate once or stop your donations at any point, your name will continue to be displayed in these intros to every theory and explanation video going forward. Now that said, I do feel it would be appropriate to somehow distinguish the ongoing patrons at the time of any particular video, and that is why donors that are not currently active will appear crossed out. I thought that this would be a small way to highlight the current donors while also staying in keeping with the reference to the cave of candidates we see in the show, in which names are often crossed out for reasons such as becoming a parent. In other words, for having other responsibilities. But by no means is this meant to be viewed as a negative mark. As Jacob says to Kate,
"It's just a line of chalk in a cave."
The other thing I wanted to address in reference to the introduction of the last video is my update regarding video quality. After expressing my enthusiasm regarding the improved quality of videos going forward due to me now editing on a Mac instead of my phone, I was pretty embarrassed to find that upon uploading that video to YouTube, the quality of the actual theory and explanation portion of that video was considerably diminished. I have still not been able to figure out why this happened. The quality was and is perfectly fine on the Mac itself, but every time I have tried re-uploading it to YouTube, the same thing has happened. For that reason, I have done the vast majority of the filming and editing of this video from my phone once again. What I plan to do is export the mostly completed video over to the Mac and then add the filter that I used last time, and hopefully that won't cause any issues. And if it does, all I then will have to do is go back to my phone and go back to the filter I was using before which will only take seconds to add, and then I can upload from here. I'm hoping the Mac filter doesn't cause any issues though, because as I'm sure you all would agree, that one's probably the best I've ever used. And if it is a success on this one, then I will continue to slowly try and figure out by process of elimination what the problem was. And hopefully I will eventually reach the point where I can just be doing all of this from the Mac. Because as I said last time, I imagine that will drastically increase the rate at which I can complete these videos. Anyways, to wrap up my typical spiel, if you enjoy this video, please do click the like button. Share any feedback you might have in the comment section. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel and click the notification bell if you would like to be notified when new videos arrive. But for now, let's get lost.
Daniel, je t'en prie, pose ton arme. Je t'aime, pourquoi j'ai-tu comme ça?
Parce que t'es pas Robert, t'es malade. Ce monstre t'a rendu malade.
Mais y a pas de monstre. Maintenant, pose ton fusil.
In the Season 5 episode, This Place is Death, we get our first significant look at the infection Rousseau first referred to all the way back in Season 1. While we only get a brief glimpse at Robert's infected state and the incident that apparently caused it, we do learn a couple of interesting things. First, this so-called sickness is connected to the monster. And second, this ailment is much less a physical illness than a behavioral one. Robert, for example, goes from a loving husband and soon-to-be father to a man that tries to murder his wife and unborn child. Our understanding of this condition becomes even clearer in the final season thanks to the only other confirmed cases from the series, those being Saeed and Claire. But how did these characters become susceptible to this infection to begin with? To what extent is their behavior altered and compelled by it? Is there any chance of recovery? Also, are there other potential examples of infected characters that were never explicitly confirmed? These are the things we'll be exploring in today's video. In this channel's previous entry, we discussed many aspects regarding the nature of the smoke monster and how it functions. In the final section of that video, we noted how the Man in Black is evidently capable of separating pieces of himself while he is in his smoke form, and concluded those separated pieces act as subconscious satellites instead of autonomous entities in their own right. In other words, there is one centralized consciousness that is the Man in Black, and it alone can replicate other corporeal forms. Meanwhile, the detached pieces act merely as extensions of that main entity. Furthermore, I believe this ability was a crucial component in how the summoning chamber and temple spring each function. The structures around both appear constructed by ancient Egyptian settlers. The same ones that seem to have worshipped the smoke monster. Indeed, the very notion of this group wanting to summon the monster suggests their allegiance to it. Anyways, by leaving behind a small amount of himself in the summoning pool, the Man in Black could sense when it was drained and answer the call. I think this is essentially the same thing he did with the spring, but to a larger degree and for a more sinister purpose. Given the Egyptians' apparent devotion to the monster, I feel it is safe to conclude what we see the spring do to Saeed was its original purpose, and that it was only when followers of Jacob began using the temple, sometime around the 20th century, that Jacob began using his abilities to keep Smokey's presence in the spring at bay. Then, after Jacob's death, it re-emerged.
The water isn't clear. What happened?
By being submerged in this spring, a mortally wounded individual can be healed. But in the process, they are exposed to and contaminated by trace amounts of the smoke monster. After which, this bit of Smokey begins to grow inside them to the point it can manipulate their mind and emotions, ultimately compelling their behavior in a way that serves the Man in Black's interests.
I don't feel anything.
Excuse me?
Anger, happiness, pain. I don't feel it anymore.
Maybe that's best, Saeed. It'll help you get through what's coming.
Of course, this is a more indirect form of transmission, one that does not require the Man in Black himself to be present. There are other examples, namely Claire and the French team, that seem to have been infected directly by the Man in Black. But why them? What made them vulnerable to his influence? The process of Saeed's infection is the most explicitly depicted in the series. So let's look at his circumstances and compare them to what we see happen to Claire in the back half of Season 4. Saeed is exposed to the contaminant when he is on the verge of death. He is then miraculously healed. His demeanor immediately following this, specifically regarding his facial expressions and speech, seems somewhat abnormal. But none of his actions at this stage are significantly uncharacteristic. This seems to be the incubation period.
There is a darkness growing in him, and once it reaches his heart, everything your friend once was will be gone.
At the end of this period, Saeed's behavior does become drastically altered.
Saeed, are you all right?
No.
Saeed! Saeed, please! Stop!
Now let's look at Claire. Like Saeed, she too has a near-death experience when the house she's in is completely destroyed in a devastating explosion. And yet, once Sawyer finds her in the debris, we see that she only has a minor head wound. Over the next day and a half, she mentions multiple times that she's not feeling quite right, even going so far as to casually mention that she was seeing things at some point.
Oh,
You okay?
yeah, just a bit woozy.
How's your head?
It's better. Bit of a headache, but at least I'm not seeing things anymore.
Then, during the second night after her injury, she abandons her infant son in the jungle. Her first dramatically uncharacteristic act. The following evening, Locke discovers her in the cabin with the Man in Black, and we see her behavior has indeed been drastically altered.
Claire?
Hi, John.
What are you doing here?
Don't worry, I'm fine. I'm with him.
Taking all of this into account, here's what I believe happened to Claire. I believe when the house exploded, she was in fact fatally wounded, at which point the Man in Black swooped in and healed her, probably while appearing to her as Charlie.
You okay?
Charlie? At least I'm not saying things anymore.
In so doing, he left behind a part of himself to spread inside her. A little over a day later, once the sickness reached her heart, as Dogen puts it, the man in black appeared to collect her, this time in the form of her father. Taking this pattern and applying it to the French team, it seems fairly easy to deduce what happened to them. What we see on screen is the monster pulling Montan beneath the temple wall. After a few moments, Montan's voice can be heard calling for help.
Qu'on aille là-dedans. Faut qu'on sorte de là. Non. Do not leave anyone behind. On y va.
The rest of the team, with the exception of Danielle, descends into the hole. Later, in the Season 6 premiere, when Hurley's group enters the tunnels this same way, they come across a one-armed skeleton.
And why is his arm missing?
It was ripped off when he was attacked by the black smoke.
This tells us the team did not succeed in rescuing Montan. For my part, I think he was dead within seconds of being pulled underground, and the voice we hear call out is actually the man in black replicating Montan. I believe he does this because he wants to lure the team into the dark tunnels where he can cause them to panic and accidentally inflict fatal wounds on each other, at which point he can then infect them. It is important to note, a person needs to be basically dead in order to be vulnerable to this influence. This especially makes sense in the case of candidates like Saeed, who are typically under Jacob's protection. In these cases, it seems likely the part of Jacob's life force residing in said candidate is allowed to die, and only they themselves are brought back by the man in black. This would mean becoming infected negates a person's status as a candidate, and going forward, their protection against direct harm from the man in black would be removed. But is this influence infallible? Do infected individuals become nothing more than the man in black's puppets? Or can they resist and overcome his control? Dogen and Lennon seem to believe there is only one way to cure this infection: death. After suspecting Saeed has been claimed, Dogen performs a test in order to determine whether or not this is the case. This test begins with Dogen coating Saeed's torso in what appears to be the same ash that adversely affects the man in black. He examines the ash for a moment, seemingly looking for some kind of reaction. Next, he sticks Saeed's chest and abdomen with needles attached to wires. He then hand cranks the machine these wires are connected to, charging it in order to electrocute Saeed. Dogen continues the electrocution until the moment Saeed cries out in agony, at which point he shuts off the machine and appears to be displeased with this outcome. Finally, Dogen brands him with a hot poker, which also elicits a howl of pain from Saeed. After Saeed is released, Dogen confirms to Lennon that Saeed did not pass the test.
Don't worry. You passed. I just lied to him, didn't I? Yes.
The nature of this test and how it informed Dogen's conclusion is extremely ambiguous. The first stage with the ash seems the most obvious. In the last few videos, we've talked about why ash, that is, volcanic ash specifically, might affect Smokey the way it does. So it makes sense that exposure to this ash might prove an effective way to test if part of the monster is residing in a person. But what about the electrocution? Wouldn't any normal person react this way? The interpretation I find the most compelling is this. We only see Dogen crank the machine about 3 times.
Just tell me what you want.
This suggests the possibility that the voltage Saeed was shocked with was actually quite low, and the only reason it was so painful for him was because of the ash's presence when the electricity was applied.
Why? Why are you doing this? We didn't torture him. We were diagnosing him.
What is still somewhat unclear to me is what exactly the branding accomplished. Some have suggested this wasn't actually part of the test and was merely a way of marking someone that has failed it. I like this idea, but there are 2 issues I have that I find to keep me from accepting it as true. The first is that the apparent purpose of doing this, that being to label a corrupted individual, would be somewhat defeated by branding a part of the body that is covered by clothing most of the time. But the bigger issue I have is with what Dogen is doing while he is branding Saeed. He stares intently at Saeed's face as if looking for something specific in his reaction. This compels me to conclude this truly is part of the test. If you have thoughts on the meaning of this branding, please do share them in the comments. At any rate, the diagnosis is reached and the medicine is prescribed. Poison.
これをジャラーに飲ませてもらおう。
He says you have to give your friend this pill.
Are you serious? What is in it? Poison.
In the eyes of Dogen and Lennon, this is the only cure.
I think it would be best if you were dead.
They believe once the darkness has fully spread, the man Saeed was will be forever lost.
There is a darkness growing in him. And once it reaches his heart, everything your friend once was will be gone.
But there is strong evidence that this is not the case. The most indisputable example of an infected person definitively going against the will of the Man in Black is Saeed's final act. By taking the bomb as far away from his friends as he can, he manages to save the lives of multiple candidates. Something the Man in Black absolutely would not have wanted. This tells us it is indeed possible for characters to resist and overcome this influence, difficult as it may be. Ironically, if not for the way Dogen treated him, Saeed may not have so easily given into it to begin with. This transitions us nicely into the first and perhaps most interesting example of a character that may have been infected without us realizing it. Now that we've gone over the symptoms of this sickness and the required conditions for its transmission, let's explore some potential examples that may have escaped our notice. The signs we're looking for are a near-death experience, followed shortly by an encounter with the Man in Black, then a fairly quick recovery, and finally a change in behavior, particularly an increased disposition towards violence. Let's start with Echo. After the hatch implosion at the end of Season 2, Echo is in very bad shape. The night after he is brought back to camp, he is visited by the Man in Black in the form of his brother.
It is time to confess. To be judged, brother.
You guys smell smoke?
Then, after needing Charlie and Hurley to rescue him from the burning tent,
Linda! Linda!
he goes from delirious and unable to stand to suddenly taking off into the jungle on his own.
I'll be back. Brother. Yeah.
Charlie! Is everyone okay?
Yeah, we're good.
Where's Echo?
Hurley and I, hold him out. Over.
It's right there. Echo? Echo?
The next day, Echo puts a knife to Locke's throat for simply mentioning his brother's name.
Charlie heard you call out for your brother before you left the camp. Is that what you're doing out here? Looking for Yemi?
Do not speak my brother's name again.
Now, to be fair, Echo's past is filled with examples of him reacting violently when provoked. But after killing two of the others his first night on the island, he has repented and dedicated himself to a new path.
I need you to know how sorry I am for this. I need you to know that I am back on a righteous path now, and that I regret my actions.
And since then, pretty much any time he has engaged in violence, it has been in defense of himself or others. This, on the other hand, is definitely not a defensive or protective act.
What are you so afraid of, Echo?
So it seems Echo meets all four of our criteria. But if he was infected, why then did Smokey end up killing him? In my opinion, what we are witnessing throughout the Cost of Living episode is the Man in Black prodding and manipulating Echo throughout the incubation period.
No! Please! No!
Confess.
Then when the time comes for Echo to confess, and therefore heed Yemi's prescribed penance, he refuses.
I ask for no forgiveness, Father, for I have not sinned. I have only done what I needed to do to survive.
This refusal demonstrates his resistance to Smokey's influence, and his lack of submission to the Man in Black's will. This clearly enrages the Man in Black.
You speak to me as if I were your brother.
Who then kills Echo out of annoyance and frustration. Over the years, many people have asked how the Man in Black was able to kill Echo if he was a candidate. The reason Echo is often regarded as a candidate is because his name seems to appear on the lighthouse dial next to the number 76. Although the name is not quite clear enough to say this with 100% certainty. This lack of clarity has led some to conclude that Echo was in fact not a candidate and was therefore always vulnerable to this type of attack from the Man in Black. But personally, I prefer the idea that he had been a candidate until he was infected, at which point his protection against the monster was no longer in effect. Moving on to our next potential case, we have Richard shortly after he first arrived on the island. After massacring everyone else on the ship, the monster leaves Richard alive, but still chained. Over the next several days, Richard attempts to free himself. Just when he appears to be getting close to succeeding, a boar knocks the nail he'd been using out of his reach. Eventually, after many days without food or water, Richard is revived by the Man in Black when he appears in his original form.
Here. Water.
After lying to Richard about being in hell and getting him to agree to do whatever he asks, the Man in Black frees him from the chains. The next morning, he arms Richard with his dagger and sends him to kill Jacob, who he claims is the devil. Once face to face with Jacob, Richard does make multiple attempts to stab him. I think a legitimate way to read these events is as follows. First, the smoke monster scans Richard's thoughts and memories so as to plot the best way to manipulate him. In the meantime, he leaves Richard to slowly succumb to starvation and dehydration. As the days pass by, the Man in Black checks in on Richard in various forms, such as the butterfly we see fly into the ship. Then, when Richard gets close to freeing himself, the Man in Black takes the form of the boar to ensure this does not happen. Once Richard is delirious, the Man in Black then projects to him in the form of his wife, feeding him the first lies to set up his manipulation. And when Richard is at last inches from death, the Man in Black arrives to heal him, infecting him in the process. This makes Richard easier to manipulate and more agreeable to the task he is given. Of course, if this is accepted as true, that would mean Jacob was able to cure Richard either when he gifted him with everlasting youth, or perhaps when he first touched him while dunking him into the ocean. Due to its evocation of baptism and purification, I favor the latter. The last potential example I wanted to address is Locke at the end of Season 3. After being shot and left for dead by Ben, John is ready to take his own life. But then come the whispers, followed by a distorted apparition of Walt, who tells him he will now be able to get up.
Don't, John. Put the gun down. Now get up, John.
He shot me and I can't move my legs.
You can move your legs. Now get out of the ditch, John.
Why?
Because you have work to do.
The next time we see Locke, he murders Naomi in cold blood. This is the very first time he ever intentionally takes a life. In fact, the episodes leading up to this well established that Locke was not a killer. After this, we do at times see an increased hostility in John's demeanor.
But you're wasting your mouth. Open your mouth. Wide.
Oh.
Don't talk. Bite down. Bite down. You're going to keep your mouth shut.
Does this mean he was infected? It does fit the pattern admittedly well, but in this case, I do not think so. What I would agree with is the likelihood that the Man in Black was intending to infect John once he was close enough to death to be vulnerable to this influence. However, once Locke was about to kill himself, the Man in Black had to intervene earlier than he had planned. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to use John to kill Naomi. So at this point, he helped John re-establish his communion with the island's energy, but was not able to infect him. This lack of infection ultimately wouldn't matter much because Locke's recent experience at the cabin
Help me.
combined with this seemingly divine intervention, finally radicalized him to the point of being willing to kill for his beliefs, an arc John's character had been on since the first season.
Boone was a sacrifice that the island demanded.
And so, even without the infection, Locke was willing to do what this vision of Walt asked of him: kill Naomi.
Right. Like you were supposed to throw a knife into that Naomi chick's back. You mind telling us who you're getting your orders from, Colonel Kurtz?
I got him from Walt.
Doing so made conflict with the freighter team that much more likely. And of course, creating conflict in which candidates can be killed is a primary goal of the Men in Black. This goal will be a large factor in our next installment, where we'll take a look at some of the many ways in which the Man in Black seeks to create conflict throughout the series, including the many forms he takes in order to do so. Until then, namaste and good luck. Oh, you're still here. Hopefully that means you enjoyed this video. If so, please consider sticking around and being a constant for this channel by clicking right up here to subscribe. And don't forget to hit the bell icon if you would like to be notified when more videos like this one arrive. In the meantime, feel free to check out previous content from this channel by clicking here or here. Oh no. Please subscribe.